The eviction notice had been taped to Emma Carter's apartment for 11 days before she finally stopped pretending it wasn't there. For 11 days, she walked past it. For 11 days, she told herself something would change. A call, a job offer, a miracle. Instead, on a cold Thursday afternoon, she stood in the empty apartment holding a trash bag filled with the last things she owned, and realized there was nowhere left to go. 6 months earlier, she had believed her life was finally beginning. She had a decent job at a startup company, a small apartment, a future she could almost see. Then the company folded. The medical bills from her mother's illness drained what little savings she had. 3 months after her mother died, her boyfriend packed his things and left. The debt notices started arriving shortly after. Now she slept in a 12-year-old sedan parked behind a grocery store. Most nights she kept the windows cracked because the condensation made her feel trapped. On the night everything changed, rain tapped softly against the windshield. Her phone battery showed 2%. Her checking account held less than $9. She was scrolling through county notices when something unusual caught her eye. Abandoned property auction. $1 minimum bid. Former Finch Apothecary. No reserve, no interest. The attached photographs showed a faded brick building standing alone near the edge of a small town 40 miles away. The comments underneath were almost laughable. Nobody wants that place. Been empty for years. Probably should be torn down. Emma stared at the listing longer than she intended. 3 days later, after the shortest auction she had ever witnessed, she became the owner. The final bid was $1. Nobody challenged it. Nobody cared. If stories like this remind you that there are still good people in the world, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. We share stories every week about ordinary people whose lives deserve to be remembered. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, share this story with them. What she didn't know was that hidden behind the pharmacy shelves waited a locked tincture cabinet that would change everything she believed about success, failure, and the value of a life. The town of Briar's Crossing looked like it had been forgotten by time. Storefronts stood half-occupied, paint peeled from wooden signs. The old railroad tracks no longer carried trains. People still waved at one another from passing trucks. They simply did it more slowly than they used to. The Apothecary sat at the far end of Main Street. Its windows were dusty, its sign barely readable. Finch Apothecary. The letters had faded so badly they looked like ghosts. Emma unlocked the front door. The hinges groaned. A rush of stale air greeted her. Then something unexpected. The faint scent of herbs. Lavender. Peppermint. Something earthy she couldn't identify. Dust covered nearly every surface, yet nothing felt neglected. It felt paused, as though someone had stepped out for lunch years ago and never returned. Rows of glass bottles lined wooden shelves. Old prescription drawers filled an entire wall. Sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating floating particles of dust. For the first time in months, Emma felt something she hadn't expected. Curiosity. She spent the next several days cleaning, sleeping upstairs in a former storage room, living off canned soup and coffee, learning the building one room at a time. Whenever she asked townspeople about the former owner, their answers sounded nearly identical. Eleanor Finch, the old pharmacist. Nice enough, kept to herself, a little strange, quiet woman. Nobody knew much about her. Nobody seemed interested in talking longer than that. It was as though Eleanor Finch had lived 80 years without leaving an impression. At least that's what everyone believed. 5 days after arriving, Emma discovered a loose floorboard near the prescription counter. Beneath it lay a small brass key. Nothing else. No explanation, just a key. That night, she walked through the building trying every lock she could find. Most opened nothing. Then she noticed an unusually narrow cabinet hidden behind a row of pharmacy shelves. The brass key slid inside perfectly. The lock clicked, the door opened. Inside sat dozens of journals, not diaries, records. Each was carefully labeled by year. Every page contained names, addresses, dates, observations. Emma opened one at random. She expected customer information. Instead, she found a note. Paid heating bill anonymously, January 14. Another entry, delivered groceries after midnight. Another, covered tuition balance. Another, found work opportunity through cousin in county office. Emma turned pages faster. The same pattern appeared again and again. Names, needs, solutions. No explanations, no signatures, no credit, only actions. Who were these people? Why had Eleanor documented everything? At the bottom of the cabinet sat a photograph. 20 people stood together outside a church. Every face was circled except one. The uncircled woman stood near the edge of the image, thin, gray-haired, almost hidden. On the back, someone had written, "They must never know it was me." Emma stared at those words for a long time. The next morning, she began looking up names. The first belonged to a retired teacher named Margaret Lewis. Margaret invited her onto the porch. When Emma showed her the journal entry, the elderly woman's expression changed. Slowly, carefully. "You found this where?" "In the apothecary." Margaret read the entry again. Then tears filled her eyes. 40 years earlier, she had nearly abandoned college because she couldn't afford certification fees. One morning, the balance simply was gone. Paid in full. She never learned who did it. The journal revealed the answer. Eleanor Finch. Margaret sat quietly for nearly a minute. "I spent 36 years teaching children because of that." Emma left with more questions than answers. The next name belonged to a mechanic, then a widow, then a veteran, then a nurse. Every story revealed another hidden act. A business saved, medicine delivered, property taxes paid, rent covered, food left anonymously. Every person believed a stranger had helped them. None knew the stranger was Eleanor. More surprising was the scale. The journal stretched across nearly 4 decades. Hundreds of names appeared. Hundreds. Emma couldn't understand it. Eleanor had owned a small-town apothecary. How could one person have touched so many lives? Then she found a coded ledger. Page after page of initials. Hundreds more, far beyond the people she had already identified. The mystery only grew. As Emma dug deeper, another problem emerged. The building was failing inspection. Electrical issues, structural concerns, roof damage. The repair estimates were overwhelming. Then came news from town council. A regional developer wanted the entire block. New construction, new businesses, new jobs. Most residents supported the proposal. The apothecary stood directly in the way. Nobody was cruel about it. Nobody threatened Emma. The reality was simply practical. The building had little economic value. At least that's what everyone assumed. Emma understood their position. Yet, every journal she opened convinced her something important lived inside those walls. If the building disappeared, so would the story. And if the story vanished, who would remember Eleanor Finch? Weeks later, while clearing debris in the basement, Emma discovered a hidden storage room behind old shelving. Inside stood dozens of boxes. She opened the first one. Letters. Hundreds of them. The second box contained photographs. The third held thank you cards. The fourth contained handwritten notes. Many began exactly the same way. "I don't know who helped me." Or, "I never got the chance to thank the person who." Emma read until midnight, then 2 in the morning, then sunrise. People had spent decades trying to express gratitude to someone whose identity they never discovered. Word spread through town. At first, a few people visited, then more. A woman arrived carrying a photograph from 1988. A man brought a letter he had saved for 23 years. An elderly couple drove 3 hours to share a story about the winter someone secretly paid for their heating fuel. Every visitor seemed connected to Eleanor. Every visitor carried a memory. The apothecary slowly transformed, not into a building, into a gathering place, into proof. People who had never met one another discovered they were part of the same invisible network of kindness. Some cried openly. Others simply sat quietly holding old photographs. For the first time since Eleanor's death, the town began seeing her clearly, not as a strange recluse, not as an eccentric pharmacist, but as someone who had quietly carried burdens nobody else noticed. One evening, Emma stood near the doorway and counted nearly 80 people inside the building, the largest crowd it had seen in decades. Nobody had been invited. They simply came, because they remembered. Several weeks later, while repairing a damaged shelf, Emma discovered one final envelope hidden inside the wall. The handwriting was unmistakable. The front read, "For whoever comes next." Her hands trembled as she opened it. The letter was surprisingly short. Most people believe being useful requires being important. They're wrong. The world changes because ordinary people notice what others overlook: a missed bill, an empty refrigerator, a lonely neighbor, a frightened student, a struggling parent. No one remembers every act, but every act leaves a mark. If enough marks gather together, they become a community. Emma stopped reading for a moment. Tears blurred the page. Then she continued, "If you're reading this, the building survived longer than I did. That means someone stayed. Thank you." She sat alone in the fading afternoon light and cried harder than she had cried when she lost her apartment, harder than she cried when her relationship ended, because for the first time in years, she understood something she had forgotten. A meaningful life wasn't measured by attention, or wealth, or recognition. It was measured by what remained in other people. Months later, grants arrived. Volunteers appeared. Preservation groups offered support. The developer withdrew, not because of protests, not because of politics, because enough people cared. Enough people showed up. The building mattered, so the community saved it. Emma stayed. She restored the apothecary room by room, not as a museum, not as a monument, as a place where people could help one another, a place where needs could quietly meet solutions. On her desk, she kept one of Eleanor's journals. Beside it sat a new journal, her journal. Same format, same purpose. Names, needs, solutions. No publicity, no credit. Just work. Years later, on a rainy evening, Emma prepared to close the shop. The bell above the door chimed. A young woman stepped inside. Tired, worried, embarrassed to even be there. Emma recognized the expression immediately, because years ago, she had worn it herself. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I don't really know where else to go." Emma smiled, the kind of smile that comes from understanding, the kind that asks no questions. "You're not bothering anyone," she said. "Come in." Outside, evening lights glowed across the town. Inside, two journals rested side by side, one belonging to Eleanor Finch, one belonging to Emma Carter. The pages were separated by years, but connected by purpose. And somewhere in the quiet rhythm of ordinary people helping ordinary people, Eleanor's work continued, not through buildings, not through plaques, not through fame, through people, which perhaps is the only way any of us are truly remembered.